Welcome to another episode of Distory, and tonight we are going to my favorite place in the world, the Magic Kingdom here in Florida. So Walt Disney World also had their own version of Snow White's Adventures first, and then gets a refurb in 94 to Scary Adventures. But tonight we're going to focus on the original 1971 all the way to 1993 attraction, Snow White's Adventures. And with me, as always, to get really terrified, because this is a doozy of an episode, is Kate, the always scared Cicerone. Kate, how are we doing?
I'm doing really great. Although I have to say, doing research for this, you were right. I don't say that often. Write it down in your diary. Because I really did think that Disneyland's version of Snow White's Scary Adventures was the scariest version.
Hang on. Yep, keep going.
But I think that this version, Walt Disney World in 1971, is the most terrifying version of this attraction that has ever existed. So I admit it. You were right. This one's scarier.
Okay. I just want everyone to see it. I'll just put it in the background for this episode.
The whole episode's gonna have a post-it of "you were right." Okay, great. Awesome. When we were in Disneyland, we talked a little bit about the history of Fantasyland, how that came about. I feel like we have to talk a little bit about that too in Disney World. And Disney World, of course, has a very different history. It wasn't the original Disney park. It was a Disney park that they were creating on the East Coast. And unfortunately, Walt Disney passed away before it was fully developed. So that did change a lot of things about this Fantasyland for Walt Disney World. The lead concept designer, though, for Walt Disney World's Fantasyland was Claude Coates, who obviously worked in Disneyland's Fantasyland as well. And he did also oversee Snow White's adventures. So I thought maybe we could just start with a couple of notes about Claude Coates, because we've talked about him, but we've never really said who he is, what he's about. I just have a couple of notes if you're good with that.
I would love to hear all about Mr. Jacket's favorite things.
So I love Marty Sklar's description of Claude Coates. He said, if somebody should define a mentor, that would be Claude Coates. He's as good as mentor as you could find because he was so open and willing to find the best idea. He was the easiest person to get to know because he liked people and was totally open to learning new things and was wide open to new ideas, a talent and a skill that was quiet. He never tried to get out in front leading the parade, if you will. He was always content to be part of the team and contribute to making the product as good as it could be. Probably an underappreciated talent from the outside because he wasn't out there in front like Mark Davis, for example, or John Hench, and he wasn't a spokesperson for anything. He let his work speak for himself. And so I like to think of him as like a gentle giant is how I think of Claude Coates. Someone called him a towering talent, which I thought was kind of a fun way to describe him. He was extremely tall. If you see him, here's him with Baloo. If you see him in any photo, he pretty much dwarfs everybody around him because he's so tall. So he was a member of the Tip Top Club, which we've talked about before, which was that club of anybody over, I think, 6'5", Disney, 6'5". And then there's a fun story of Claude Coates, too, that I have. That's Walt Disney was once driving the stagecoach around Disneyland and kind of calling out to people, offering them a ride. And Claude Coates was like, hey, I want a ride. And he's like, no, you can't get in because you're going to ruin the scale, because the stagecoach was pony sized and Claude Coates was too big. So Walt Disney wouldn't give him a ride. So
he would ruin it.
He would ruin it. And I also have a quote of what Claude Coates said he loved about Disney. When he was asked, he said, just that it's a good upbeat philosophy. I think I'm always proud of the fact that most everybody you talk to when you mention Disney think it's a fun place to be and fun place to work, and it is. It's because I think of all the attributes are good ones. I guess the word upbeat keeps coming in all the time, but that's the way I feel about the company. It just goes onward and upward, which I thought was a fun way to think about Disney. And he did have a quote about the Snow White ride, specifically the Disneyland version, before we move here onto Fantasyland. He said, the Snow White ride once again takes a very popular story, popular theme, and you get to experience the place that Snow White experienced. That was the theme of that one. Even though you don't see Snow White, I think the big improvement we made over what had been done with dark rides before was the way that we left people with a little 2-minute experience within a certain story that they had known from our animated films. So that's how he felt about the Snow White ride that he helped develop. And just to let us get to know Claude Coates a little bit, because he's a good guy and he just doesn't get talked about enough. So we'll see him show up more as we go through here. We'll illustrate some more of his concept art and some of the ways that he influences attractions specifically. But I just wanted to mention a little bit about Claude Coates.
Give him his flowers.
Talking about 1971 Fantasyland, this was being developed in the late 1960s. Had planned for some new rides that differentiated from Disneyland. So they weren't originally going to just like kind of copy Disneyland, so to speak-ish, with their rides. They had a couple of dark rides planned. One was a Mary Poppins ride. So if you remember when we talked about that Disneyland, there was going to be a beautiful ride, a dramatic ride, and like a funny, humorous, crazy ride. Those were the three that Walt wanted, right? Well, they did the same concept here. So Mary Poppins was going to be in place of Peter Pan as the beautiful ride. Especially because the movie had just come out in 1964 and was a huge hit. Then they were going to do a Sleeping Beauty ride, dark ride, in place of Snow White, which would have been the dramatic ride. And then they were going to have The Legend of Sleepy Hollow in place of Mr. Toad. And I know how much you love that one, Kirk. And I'm sorry.
That's me calling the sandworm to attack.
Yeah. So I did try to find actual concept art of this, and it doesn't seem like it exists, that at least exists out in the public. It's probably in an Imagineering drawer over there in the art morgue. And I did find something that said they were also thinking about putting it in Liberty Square at some point, where you would have ridden in hollowed out spinning jack-o'-lanterns through a variety of scenes until the final confrontation with the Headless Horseman. Yeah. So those of you who don't know, Kirk has been preaching the need for a Sleepy Hollow ride for a long time. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit of soapbox?
No. No, not really. I think, all right, ready? Real quick. Hall of Presidents gets removed just because I think it's an underutilized area and could be a better use as a ride. I'm always ride over show. So I think that gets removed. It also removes some of I understand the nostalgia, but you could keep all that Lincoln stuff over in Disneyland. We don't need the Hall of Presidents. And besides, I think we have a much better show and appreciation of our founding fathers and the creation of this country when you go over to the American Pavilion with, what is it, the American Adventure?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
That is awesome. And it's got animatronics the entire way, tells a really good story. And I think with Franklin and Mark Twain as narrators, I think it just comes across more empowering and exciting rather than just straight political and strife. And it's mainly like a Ken Burns documentary video for 25 minutes. And then you get to see all the presidents and they speak for like 2 seconds. It's like nothing. So that whole entire area could easily be turned into a 2-story dark ride, which I think would be so sick. And my gosh, if it spun around like a la Pinocchio with a teacup on it, or the Who Framed Roger Rabbit attraction, if we rode in a spinning jack-o'-lantern, stop.
Right.
Everyone would, and I don't even care that people don't know the story. They would learn the story through the film.
Oh, they would create some sort of new IP for it. You know, That's what they do. You know, that's how they would manage that. I agree.
Where's is The Rock busy right now? I'm going to need you to play Ichabod Crane.
And they have to get music by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think that's the combo, right?
That's the plug and play when in doubt.
Anyway, thank you, Kirk, for that. But so we didn't get any of those rides. There was also, they considered a Sword in the Stone dark ride because that movie came out in 1963. So that would have been really interesting as well. But what happened was Walt Disney passed away in 1966, and Roy Disney decided to save costs like he does. He's more of a budget-minded person and not like reinvent the wheel. Don't redesign everything. Instead, let's just take the ideas of the ones that we had in Disneyland and just change them a little bit, but put them in there. So that's what they did instead of having all these amazing new dark rides. We still got some pretty amazing rides, but they're not new ones. But they also added 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, The Submarine Voyage, and Mickey Mouse Revue, which was later shipped to Tokyo Disneyland. But Fantasyland opened with 10 attractions in 1971, and the rides were all styled after the designers of the attractions at WED, which is actually really cool. So Of course, It's a Small World is styled after Mary Blair. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride is Rolly Crump. Cinderella Castle was Dorothea Redmond and Herb Ryman. The facades were patterned after Disneyland's medieval fair, which was styled after also Ivan Earle's Sleeping Beauty, all those, that medieval fair style, which his style was influenced by Mary Blair, but that's a whole other thing. And then the Mickey Mouse Revue and Snow White's Scary Adventures was patterned and painted after Claude Coates' personal style. So I love that those rides in particular, like they do in Disneyland too, but like they're very specifically like, this is this designer's style in these particular attractions.
Yeah, so anyway. For Claude Coates, it had to be, you can't bump your head, so they had to make the clearance a little bit higher.
Oh my gosh, that would be fun if that was true.
I love that when you're in the Muppets, like you have to be shorter than this to enter, and there's a big spot that's like chunked out because somebody clearly hit it and like broke apart pieces of it.
Yeah. So one of the biggest changes that we had with this attraction and with all these ones that were being developed in the Magic Kingdom was the fact that Mapo was established in 1964, which was previously had been Disneyland's machine shop, and it got a name change and basically a huge influx of cash from the success of Mary Poppins. So that's what's called Mapo. And there's still stickers for Mapo on the back of some things in Disneyland, especially. That you can find, which is really fun. So this was WED Enterprises' now in-house tech crew to execute their designs to make amazing things. And so the level of detail, the level of artistry just leveled up because suddenly we have access to a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of technology and a whole bunch of artists, right? So this also meant figures could be more easily and sophisticatedly made than previously. So off-the-shelf standardized parts could be assembled into reliable mechanical skeletons. They had fiberglass and plastic could be cast from molds for predictable and replaceable body parts, so they could remold things really easily. Rubber heads, hands, and gloves could be mass-produced to fit demand. So this is where we start to see all of these attractions where we have things like Beacon Joe, who is repeated. They use his mold again and again for multiple faces. Doing the robot. So distracting.
No, it's like an animatronic who has like limited range of motion.
Oh, yeah. So anyway, that's why you see a lot of the animatronics reused and whatnot as the advent of Mapo and all the audio animatronic reproduction that they did. But then, so this version of Snow White was the first one with scalable physical assets, which meant much of the sculpting, scenic design, and the props of this 1971 version became the template for all the subsequent versions. So every Snow White Scary Adventures that came after this one used a lot of the same figures from this one. That's why even though we did Disneyland's Snow White Scary Adventures in 1983 first, a lot of that stuff came from this one because of this transition. So kind of an interesting note. And I did have I had something from Tony Baxter, who he was pretty, still young at WED during these days working in the model shop. We learned about that in the Big Thunder series when he was working on the model for Big Thunder Mountain. But he said, I remember working on mundane things for Snow White, the dark ride in Florida. And Claude Coates would say, why don't you take that little area to your office and fiddle with it, come up with an idea, bring it back, and we'll see what you've got. I remember going back to my desk and saying, I can't believe this. I'm working on the Snow White ride and I'm only 22 years old and he's letting me design something for it. And if he liked it, it wasn't like, okay, now it's Claude's design. Card Walker, who was the president of the company at the time, was touring and Claude was showing off and he'd say, Tony, come on over. I want you to meet Card and show Card what you came up with. I think it's really, really unique, which I think really speaks to Claude Coates' character as well.
Yeah, being a mentor.
Yeah, he was not going to just like take credit for what his underlings were doing.
I think a lot of people can empathize with that. It's the difference between good leadership and poor leadership. Good leadership tries to foster and enjoy and is not afraid of good talent and wants them on their team. They want people who are better than them on their team versus somebody who's like, I need to have everybody who's less skilled so that I get all the credit, which is dumb.
Right. Exactly. And remember, this is Claude Coates was also the one that told him, I think it was Tony, to come down and like see pirates, what we're doing down here, even though he was a cast member. And he wasn't supposed to be in this back area of Pirates of the Caribbean while it's being developed, but he kind of snuck down the stairs to see what was going on. Claude Coates was like, come on in, like, let's look around. And so definitely the definition of a mentor. And I love that about Claude Coates.
I basically, for those that are listening, I basically am riding the coattails of Kate. She's brilliant. I stand here. I make a
No.
couple laughs, occasionally throw in some pictures, some visuals, and one or two good fun facts, and we're good.
It's not true. It's not true. We're a team.
It's so much easier. I like this. I like what I'm doing.
We're a team. We're a team for Distory. So I have two more things here before we kind of dive into the actual attraction. So the sculptures were so much more detailed, partially because of this Mapo thing. So instead of being handcrafted, the characters were now sculpted. So this is where we kind of see more of this iconic style come in with these Fantasyland rides of the sculpted faces that we're used to seeing. This is about the time that it came into being. So the WED sculpture staff, including Blaine Gibson and Adolfo Procopio, he made the witch, the raven on a skull, which we'll see, 6 haunted trees, crocodile logs, an entire cottage interior, and all the 7 dwarfs. So he's the one that did all of that.
Let me just tell you for a second. I am going to preface this. If you are visually watching this, or if you're auditorily just exploring this, you need to see what these figures look like. So I implore you to watch this episode as well, because, whoa,
Yes.
it's creepy. And
It's something.
It's amazing. It's no wonder why I made my cousin cry when I forced him on this ride back in the 90s.
I missed a good comment from our friend Jim here on Distory. He said, riding the coat's tails.
That's me. That's me. Although I'm the tall one in this equation.
Yeah, that is true. You are taller than me. I can never keep up with you because you walk so fast. I'm like, I got little legs.
I don't really slow down that much.
No.
It's just so much easier.
They also had made several figures for the Mickey Mouse review. So a Snow White figure, which ended up in Alice in Wonderland later. That's a whole nother story. 7 totally different dwarves and forest animals. So they did a lot of sculpting. That's all you need to know about that. So I have a few notes about what makes this ride so terrifying. And we'll kind of like get into it as we get into the ride, because you'll see as we go through. But not only are there like way more jump scares, but I was thinking about it. What made this more scary to me? It's very, very dark all the way through. So pay attention to that as we go through at how dark everything is. The color palettes,
It's a dark
lighting.
ride, Kate. What do you want it to be?
It's dark, but it's like extra dark compared to everything that we've seen so far.
Okay, welcome to an extra dark ride.
Okay, but it's not just dark in like physically dark. It's also dark because there's no comic relief or lighthearted moments or anything. It's like it's just intense all the way through after the first scene.
The soundscaping too. The whole entire thing is like,
Yeah.
whoa, and
Yeah.
so like all of that is it.
And the cackle. The witch's cackle.
There's music in the beginning, and then there is no soundtrack. It's just straight up horror show for the rest of the time. The soundscaping is crazy scary.
Yeah, it's crazy that they don't incorporate the music from the movie into the attraction. It's just like it's a kind of in the beginning, and that's pretty much it. At least for this version.
Mm-hmm.
So as we go through, just kind of pay attention to all those kind of elements as like what's making this scary. But do you want to kick us off? I've been talking for a long time. Why don't you bring us into the exterior of this,
oh my gosh,
this building?
Let's enjoy some good hyper overexposed photos for a second.
Who doesn't like a good overexposed photo?
Oh my goodness, look at this sucker. This thing is whoop, hang on. Yeah, this is crazy how the facade is very boring, to be honest. I mean, we are getting the crossover from Disneyland with those medieval style tents and that pinstriping on it, but It just literally says Snow White's Adventures, and that's it. There's no the only character that we see is all the way on the left. I'm gonna pan in and zoom in here. Is you see the witch with an apple, which is important because basically the witch is trying to shove that apple literally down our throats, and when we deny her about 5 times, she tries to off us several different ways. It's not good.
Yeah. So it's basically the warning sign that was in Disneyland that looks like they duplicated for Walt Disney World.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looks like to me. And it's really small, so it's easy to miss. So if you're thinking Snow White's Adventures, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I mean, again, most popular cartoon, right? So full feature cartoon, widely popular, huge queue, completely filled, awesome blown out hairdos and Umbros. I'm into it. It's great.
Yeah. That's it's really not much more to say about it besides this striped tent. It's got the little crowns on the poles. So I think those still exist today, which we'll find out later. But the crowns are on the poles and there's a sign. That's pretty much it. So unless you have anything else, do you have more exterior photos?
This queue is terribly boring, much like every queue when they first start is just a stark metal stanchion-filled area to hold people.
Yeah, people pen. That's all it is. People pen.
It sounds so malicious. I like it.
That's what I call those things in Animal Kingdom, you know, when you like go out. But
pens?
Yeah, people pens. I think that's what they actually call them. Or at least maybe I've called them that, and I think they actually call them
Yeah, I'm like...
It's hard to say.
What?
Hard to say. Let's go into this people pen, shall we?
Somebody asked what this ride space becomes. It eventually will become, what do you call it?
Fairy Tale Princess Hall.
Fairy Tale Princess Hall.
Yeah.
Character meet and greet versus this horror show. What's wrong with us?
Yeah.
Seriously, we've gotten too soft.
So let's go into the people pen. So it's really different in this load area because in Disneyland, it's like most traditional dark rides at Disney where it just like the car pulls up and you get in and then you go into the dark ride, the doors open up and you enter in it and you start the ride. But this ride's a little bit different in that you do load. You can see that at the bottom of this map. There's a loading area, but then you're going to go into an actual kind of like scene one before you go in through the doors. So different thing. And it's interesting, this whole area has a lot of details to it that are all kind of painted flats. And they have these trees that are basically Claude Coates inspired. We've talked about him and the scary trees before. Well, trees in general, you see trees that are all kind of distorted, and that is Claude Coates. You can do this in a whole bunch of Disney movies too. I like to point out with my kids, I tell them like, the trees look all distorted. That was probably Claude Coates' background, and so now they just like shout out Claude Coates whenever we watch movies together. Yeah. So you can see his influences all over the place in these particular trees.
Kate, I can't imagine how you and your family spend Arbor Day. It must be amazing.
We like our trees.
I mean, you guys should branch out into other plants at some point.
That would be tremendous. Okay, so the other thing they have is a little dwarf's cottage as well. But this one's like, it's not like the big facade we saw in Disneyland. It's like a little miniature version.
It's really tiny.
Yeah, that I think it's just a painted flat.
Right, it is a painted flat. Although, if you look at this photo, they are layered, right? So it's not like it's not in a somewhat dimensional space, but they are flat still. But it kind of reminds me of the multi-plane camera kind of vibe with flat.
Yeah,
they're spatially distanced, so you get a feeling of depth. However, they're still just two-dimensional.
Well, except for the cottage, I think is three-dimensional-ish. Because you can see it from the side. It definitely looks like a little house.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I had to grab it from like a screen grab from something that was super blurry, but It is definitely, the house itself is three-dimensional, but everything else is more
Is this a tiny dwarf cottage for ants?
Oh, I found a better one. Here you go.
That's pretty good, dude.
Mm-hmm. So you can see that there's a little miniature dwarf cottage, and then the rocks here too are three-dimensional that they have, but like the plant is not that's on it. And apparently there's a waterfall on this side, but I could not find it in any of my concept art. I just saw somebody describe it as there being a waterfall on the right side of this queue. So if we run into it somewhere, we'll take a look.
Yeah, the only thing that I have is the castle, and then you do notice that this gate as we're entering in does have brickwork that is 3D as well. And then the most important thing that gets added in here, which we don't have in the Disneyland version, is the wishing well, which we do get like I said before, there is only one song that is played, and it's in this...
song? Get it? One song? Sorry.
I'm wishing...
One thing you did miss, Kirk, though, is did you see the operators?
I did. So I noticed that in one of the playthroughs that the operators were just sitting behind like just a normal boring like control.
See, even
box.
Jim says, "What about the console? We missed the console." See,
Yeah,
the people want the console.
It's funny because even in this map, they write control console, so it's like, oh man, I got to see what that looks like.
Yeah, it's not very interesting, unfortunately.
No, it's not. It's not.
It's not a big stump. It's just kind of like a themed box that they have.
It's a themed box.
The ride vehicles are the same as the ones that we see in Disneyland. Remember how I said I'm pretty sure they got those cars from the Walt Disney World version? Well, I think we have confirmation of that the cars are indeed from there, which are themed after. I forgot that I had these. So they're themed after the little beds of the dwarves. So they have their little names on the front, but they're pretty much identical to the ones that are in Disneyland. I don't see any differences there.
Probably made in somebody's driveway as well.
So we're going to circle around the wishing well. There is that mural of the castle that's up on the side. I don't have any great pictures of it. It's so hard to see anything in this ride. Oh, and there's these cool trash cans that are in the queue too. We didn't mention them, but I like them.
Pretty neat. I didn't notice them.
Yeah, they're
They've got a cool pattern. I wonder if that's the Fantasyland trash can. Now I have to look up Fantasyland 1971 trash can styles.
That's your homework for this week.
Normal things to Google.
Here's the castle mural that is next to the wishing well. And then do you want to talk about what comes next after the wishing well?
So after the wishing well, we are heading into this area. What do they call it? They call it the Queen in Window, and then into the Queen's Chamber. So there's nobody in the queue, by the way, of this 1991 version, proving that for at least a decade, nobody has been going on this because it's so horrifying and desperate need of an overhaul. So hang on, let's tilt around there we go. Now we're going through the drawbridge doors.
And this before we hit that area, the Queen looking out the window. This is where they get that concept for the 1983 Disneyland version of the Queen peeking through the window.
She was up here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. She's right above the doors, which you can't see in that video, but she's peeking out.
Oh, that's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Was she a static figure or did she move? Do you know?
She opened the curtains. That's all.
Man, so
yeah.
That's straight. Well, that's still really cool.
Yeah, that's where we get it for the Disneyland version.
And by the way, this is there's one other time where we see the Queen as the Queen, and then the rest of the thing, she is straight up Witch Hag City.
She is. That's a good way to describe it.
I don't know about that. Well, welcome to the ride. This is Witch Hag City, and I love what you did with the place.
Indeed. So we head through these doors. Now, do you remember when we talked about kind of that early work order for Disneyland and the plot that they had for that ride? The layout, it was going to go into a castle first. And so now I finally put all the pieces together because I never went on this 1971 version. It was before my time. And I didn't go to Disney World until I was much older in life. And so I did not realize that pretty much the storyline of this one was what they were going to do in Disneyland. And then they changed it to make it more like Disneyland's original 1955 version. So what we're seeing now is what they had proposed for the 1983 version, but they pivoted away from it. So kind of an interesting way to look at this. So what do we see next, Kirk?
We see a giant mirror on the wall.
Which just doesn't look anything like one in the movie.
No, dude, like that's not a magic mirror. It's not anything. It's just it's got some weird eyes. It's very bird-like and almost serpentine at the top. And that's it. And it's like golden blaze, but it's just a mirror. It's literally nothing.
And you see yourself in the mirror, which is funny because when I went on that haunted mansion in Rehoboth Beach, that was the very first thing we saw was a mirror of ourselves when we went into that. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, God. It's me.
It's terrifying.
You could see into my inner fears. I mean, again, this is kind of harking into the fact that 1971, we're supposed to be playing the part of Snow White. Hence, Snow White is not visible in this version at all in Walt Disney World as well, just like Disneyland's was, because we're supposed to be the character. So it's almost like we're the witch who's like, yo, who's the fairest? And then boom, we see ourselves and we're like, oh, we're the fairest. But you don't feel like that at all. And this is not the magic mirror. It's very strange.
I feel like I'm the fairest. I don't know about you. Just kidding.
Maybe you need to get in the sun out. Yeah. Little vitamin D.
Oh, man.
Wishing.
Yeah. Well, so we see the mirror, and then we see what next? We're going to the Queen to Witch transformation, but it doesn't look like the one in Disneyland.
No.
No.
It's got this weird... What's up with the flooring? The flooring reminds me of like Alice in Wonderland.
It is a weird kind of like not checker box, but like a
No,
serious geometric.
It's definitely a chessboard, you know?
Well, there's the one in the hallways, a chessboard, and then the one below us is some sort of geometric design.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I didn't know which one you were talking about.
Yeah, we do see this painted flat has like the illusion of a hallway that's going out to the moon, which is green, which we've talked about green, right? Green, scary, right?
Villain action. Mm-hmm.
So foreshadowing of what's to come there. And then next to that, we do see the queen in her mirror, which also doesn't really look like the mirror from the movie at all.
Yeah, I don't get it. We're so far off.
But she does have that effect, just like Disneyland, except this one doesn't seem to turn. I feel like yours has purple sleeves and this one has black, and so they must be from different eras.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely turns, because here you can see in this section, she starts...
Well, the witch turns, but the queen doesn't, see?
Oh, yeah. No, the witch doesn't move. Or the queen doesn't move in the background. Also,
right.
she doesn't look like the queen. So, like, it's kind of weird, right? Like, you see a crown on her head, but you don't see the queen's face right here. Like, all you do is you see the witch looking forward, but with a crown on her head. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, this should be the evil queen, and then when she turns, but that's nope.
Yeah, and I have Jade in here in my chat is saying that the dress is pink, which is not really her color of her dress, so that's weird too. It's strange. And so I think that they improved it for the 1983 Disneyland version because they made not only it look more convincing, but they actually have the queen in the mirror turns at the same time as the witch. And that makes it more convincing that rather than she's just staring at a picture of...
I think Joanne Fabrics had a deal going on. They were like, whatever, just get the pink stuff. Nobody cares. It's so dark.
Nobody's going to notice.
Nobody's going to notice.
Joanne Fabrics had a deal. I love
just
it.
Who cares? You know? So yeah, transformation scene. Yep.
And right next to it, before we leave this room, we have to talk about this throne, okay? Because this throne has issues.
Is it throning you off?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is. Because this looks more like the coronation chair that was used in England more than the one in the film. Like, it does not look anything like... Here's the one in the film, which has the peacocks on it, which we talked about in our previous episode about the meaning of that. But that throne doesn't look anything like this one, but it does look like the St. Edward's chair or the King Edward's chair that they use for coronation, right? So I want to do a little throne talk, if that's okay, for just a minute.
Great. She's going to get up on her throne. Go ahead, slay queen. Get it.
So this is the King Edward's chair. It was not originally intended to be a coronation chair. King Edward I of England seized the stone of scone, the traditional...
the breakfast treat.
Yeah, well, from
I
Scottish
have
King.
received thy throne of scone, and therefore everyone shall have tea and crumpets.
The throne of scone.
They did. They seized the stone of scone, the traditional, say that 5 times fast, the traditional coronation seat of Scottish kings. So they would sit on it when they were coronated from Scone Abbey in Perthshire, I think that's how you say that, in 1296. So it's a really old stone. Edward brought the stone to England and commissioned the coronation chair to hold it. So it used to sit directly on the stone. The kings would sit directly on the stone, or queens, till 1700s when they added a wood platform over it. So that is a relatively new addition to this chair. But in 1996, the stone was returned to Scotland and kept at Edinburgh Castle for a long time, with the proviso that it be returned to England for use at the coronations, which it was in 2024 with our new king. I'm sure there's a stone underneath him there as he's sitting on this chair.
Was he a marionette? They made him hold those things just to keep him propped up. They're like, all right, hold these scepters because otherwise you're keeling over.
It is stored in Westminster Abbey, so I got to go see it, which was really fun. And you can see that the stone is not located underneath there right now.
Dude, where's the stone?
They keep it, well, they kept it in Edinburgh, and now it's moved to some other museum somewhere up there, but I can't remember where this year.
He's not my king. If you don't sit on a stone, I
He
don't
did.
trust
No,
you.
they put the stone back in for his coronation.
All right.
Just
The
said
stone-
that. You weren't
the stone-
listening.
No, I heard you say that they returned the throne, but the throne is still there.
No,
I
they
realized
returned
that
the
they
stone
removed
to the throne
and the stone
that
gets
was from
put in
Scone.
the throne. The stone throne scone got put back. You know, I get it.
Anyway, I do want to say this is a Gothic-style armchair that was carved from oak between 1297 and 1300 by a carpenter, Walter of Durham.
Carved this from oak. This is like everything's so bleak.
The king ordered the chair to be made of bronze, but he changed his mind and decided it should be made of wood instead. And it's interestingly enough, it was originally covered in a gilding and colored glass, much of which has now been lost, but you can still see designs on the back. And there was a time when you could go and like pay some money back in the 1800s and go sit on this and like photo op, but they didn't have, selfies back then. But people would actually take little pieces of it off as like souvenirs. And so that's why it looks like the decorations on the top are kind of missing some things. Even though they've restored it, there's people would take little pieces of the coronation chair as a souvenir back in the day.
What I think is weird? I think it's very strange that, in an era pre-internet, in an era pre-ChatGPT, where people can be lazy and just like pull pictures off the internet really, really seamlessly without any time or attention, your best reference for a ride built around a film that you own the film, why wouldn't you just take the throne concept art? Like, you're going to build this thing. Who's the person who was like, oh, no, this has to be the coronation scone throne? Nobody. Is that strange?
I don't know.
Weird, I don't know whose creative decision it is. It was very odd.
And it's very much like, you see this in a couple of other Fantasyland rides as well. I feel like they just kind of did what they felt like they wanted to do with some of these rides. Because you think of like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, which was going to be Motor Mania, and it was originally going to be he would get hit by a train and then go to heaven, which wasn't in the movie or the book. And then they changed it. He was going to get hit by a train and then go to HE double hockey sticks, which is also not in the, like, just to make people laugh. They just kind of made decisions based on like what they thought people might enjoy. But this one's so interesting. I wonder if it's because Claude Coates had a lot more creative control over this versus like Ken Anderson being very involved with the ones in Disneyland. Like, I don't really know the difference.
You know what? I think they're right. Guests would really have enjoyed this throne style more than a peacock. So
I disagree, though. I think that the peacock is superior in every possible way.
Sarcasm, Kate. Of course, the peacock is infinitely better than the nonsense we got.
Right? So
It's
I don't
so
know.
much more
it's
brilliant.
Weird.
It's terrible.
Here, wait. Let's do it side by side. Let's get them. We can compare and contrast. Yeah. Definitely a different throne.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's all the throne talk I've got for you.
That was really fascinating. I like that. That was a good rabbit trail. I'm into it.
I thought it just reminded me so much of that one that I just saw last year. So
yeah, I don't know how you would even thought of that. That is impressive. I love it.
Thank you. All right. Shall we move on from the witch's chambers? She's so terrified. She's got like bright red eyes.
I like how she is like, it's like, obviously with a flash, this ruins a lot of things, but there's like this weird coating on her and she has like green palms. It's very creepy.
Yeah, it's like I can't seem to get it to focus on it because it's like, I don't know if I zoom out. She's got like a green face. She is. So should we head on into the dungeon then?
The dungeon. Let's do it.
So a lot of this dungeon is similar to what we later see in Disneyland in 1983. We start off with the lovely concept of this dude who is reaching for some water. And this one's more true to the movie though, because you know how she like kicks over a vessel that's holding water.
It's not. It's like a bucket.
Yeah,
That's
the
like a
vessel's
mug.
wrong.
Yeah.
The vessel's wrong, but it's More than the other ones were reaching for a fountain in Disneyland, remember? Which
Yeah,
is
there
like
was
not...
no fountain. You're right,
Yeah.
you're right. There was a receptacle where before it was a source.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
This is Distory. This is what we do. This is our
use
life.
Very eloquent language to talk about prop vessels or water flows. Yep.
So there's two other skeletons that are in here as well. And the first one reminds me of Oswald. Remember we talked about Oswald in Disneyland, who was the talking skeleton, and apparently his jaw would move and he would say, "Go back."
Mm-hmm.
So there's Oswald. I'm going to call him Oswald. I don't think that's actually his name, but I'm going to call him that because it's easier for me. And then we see a second one. Do you want to talk about this one a little bit? He's pretty fun.
Now, hang on. This one of them, I can't tell from this edition. I don't think any of them move, but this guy's underneath a giant spider web, and he's got like a huge black widow coming down on him, but he's splayed out with his hands chained above him, and he's sitting down with his legs splayed out in front. But like, again, is this like...
The spider would actually crawl down towards the ride vehicle, from what I understand. And yeah,
I couldn't see that in any of them.
Yeah, well, I know in Disneyland Paris that version has a spider that moves, so I think they took that for Disneyland Paris, from this version, the idea of the spider kind of crawling towards you, and it's like a red spider, so it's like a I don't know if it's a black widow. It definitely reminds me of the ones that used to be in the Haunted Mansion as well. So I'm like, did they just get a deal on spiders? They're like, well, we got two over here in the Haunted Mansion, so let's just, put another one over here.
Dude, how did you know that thing moved?
I read it somewhere. I don't remember where.
That's
but
crazy.
Yeah, it comes down towards the skeleton is what I heard. But I know in Disneyland Paris it does. So
you're telling me that's not the markings of a black widow on the back?
Oh, it might be Black Widow, but it's red. Black Widows aren't red. Like their hourglass is red, but not like
the hourglass is red.
Not the like whole spider though.
It's not even really an hourglass though. What is that thing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not an hourglass. Maybe it's not a Black Widow. Unidentified giant spider is heading towards the skeleton.
Ew. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking up spiders.
Oh gosh, you have to warn me before you do that. I'm like Jackie and Birds with the spiders. I can't.
So bad. This is it. What is this? A huge spider pattern form.
It looks like an orb weaver. My daughter loves spiders, like with a passion. That's what she wants to do for a living. So I've learned to cope with my fear, but I still don't like them.
They are really nasty.
Yeah. But I think that they had these when they had them in the Jungle Cruise too. Remember in Walt Disney World, so we had these big spiders. They show up in the Jungle Cruise. They showed up in the Haunted Mansion. Now where they have the like endless staircase, there used to be the spiders there that would like click clack with their like actuators. I also read that the iron gates swing back and forth in this section. And if you remember, just at the very, very tiny little recap, the reason that we have dungeons in this when they're not very prominent in the movie at all was because of in the original Disneyland version in 1955, they took a lot of the concept art from Snow White that was unused. And they had all of these concepts of the dungeon, including the queen chaining the prince up in the dungeon when he refuses her proposal. And so they decided,
I think you're right. I think it's a spotted orb weaver.
It's probably an orb weaver.
I'm going. I think you're in line. Can you zoom in a little bit more? I'm pretty sure that's
not much. Right. He's kind of like up there in the top.
I think that's it here. I think that's a spotted orb weaver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Good eye, dude. For somebody who's
I have it. It's my child loves spiders. She keeps pointing them out.
That's very
She
impressive.
said we were watching some movie. Oh, we were watching The Haunted Mansion from 2003 last night with Eddie Murphy. And there was a spider that was inside the Haunted Mansion. She said that spider shouldn't be there because it's an orb weaver and they live outdoors. So technically this spider shouldn't be there either.
Wow.
Because they live outdoors.
Man.
So thank you to my daughter for helping us.
He's moving on up in the world, you know?
They rehomed him in the dungeon.
His great-grandfather left him some web, and he was able to...
I love it. Another thing that we see in this area is some glowing green eyes of rats, which I don't have any pictures of. Do you have any sort of footage of this at all? Of rat eyes?
I don't know if I have rat eyes, but I have these eyes.
Yeah, those are later.
Those are later, okay.
Take those away. We're not ready for those. So there's glowing green eyes of rats that you see, which is an effect that they lifted directly from Pirates of the Caribbean in Disneyland. So there is this end scene in Disneyland where you go up the waterfall, right, in Disneyland's Pirates, and you see all these little eyes peeking out at you, which I never put two and two together that those are rats until this. I just thought they were like creepy eyes, but I'm like, they could be rats in Pirates of the Caribbean, which I don't know why I didn't think of that, but that's what they're supposed to be here, is these rats' eyes, and they just took it right from that other attraction. So that's where you get it. And we also see them in the bats in Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, right? I think they're red there, but we see bat eyes, the same kind of effect. They just used it for that attraction as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also, the scene is extra dark in some of these spots in the dungeon, not just because it's dark, but also because the ride spur line to vehicle storage branches off of this track here. And you can see that in the map where Kirk's showing you there. So it's where they store the extra vehicles. And what were you showing us with the Raven? The Raven.
Because we're starting to go, right after that skeleton, the Raven is very prominent amongst some like poison containers. And again, most of these are flats, right? So like you'll have these like beakers and flasks filled with various liquids and ingredients. It says poison on the left, and then you get the Raven there. It's also kind of funny because the way that they illuminate him, his shadow isn't, even though he's a real sculpt and there's a skull beneath him and books that are all real sculpts, they draw a shadow, but it's a weird shadow perspective because that's not the way like the light source is. It's very strange.
So this is a throwback to, I'm gonna butcher this name. The movie, the 1920 German silent horror film movie called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And so they used this effect of shadows looming in this all over the place in this movie. So I think that's where we see all these kind of like painted shadows and shadows behind things. I think it's alluding to that classic movie, which, you know, also used the visual style of like dark, twisted, sharp, pointed forms, oblique, curving line structures and landscapes that lean and twist at unusual angles, which sounds an awful lot, like Claude Coates. Look, you already got it. So I think that, I feel, if I had to guess, this is just pure speculation, I have a feeling that Claude Coates might have been fond of this particular art style of this film based on the way that he himself creates art with all of these kind of twisted trees and whatnot. And so I think that's why we see a lot of these shadows appear in this attraction, is because of Claude Coates being in charge and him really loving this particular art style. That's my best guess.
All right, ready? Now is where you have to reach to the Hatbox Ghost and the similarities.
Oh, yeah. Well, and look at all the geometric shapes and stuff, which is just all over this attraction. You know, it's, to me, there's so many connections to kind of like, if we want to make it scary, we're going to incorporate these elements of horror movies that people would be familiar with. Not horribly familiar with from 1920, but it's not like it was, you know.
Yeah, I was like, you might want to backtrack that.
I will say that the skull also is supposed to have glowing eyes, which I can't see in these pictures, but that's what I've read. So that's all I have for this one, unless you have anything else.
Nope.
So let's move on to the witch and her cauldron. She's something. I love that the apple is like painted. It looks like an alien. The green on this red apple doesn't look like a poison apple.
It's, well, you know, it's poison.
It just looks so different. Yeah, but you can definitely see she's definitely more sculpted than the Disneyland version that we had, though, you know?
Hot girl dungeon.
There's also a poison apple recipe book that's open, but it's really interesting. The style of this is so different because everything looks like it's like, you know what it reminds me of is those like 3D puzzles that you put together. That's what this reminds me of. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that.
You know what's fun though is that this is the first time that we've ever seen the ingredients on the bottles that match the actual recipe for the poison apple.
Yeah, that's
you know
true.
how, like, even in Fantasmic they talk about it like with a scream of fright, the black of night. So black of night and scream of fright are both listed as she somehow has percolated those things.
Well, and again, you see the shadow effect from that movie again behind her. She has her shadow is now painted on the wall behind her. I do have a note that as we turn away from the witch, a shelf of potions above our heads crashes down with a loud glass shattering sound. So again, we talk about sounds being, there's no music, there's just kind of like sounds. The witch's cackle kind of sounds like it's always before you and behind you. It's like everywhere all at once. Sorry, I just saw a note from someone that I want to say, I don't have it with me. I had this fantastic concept art from Chernobog. Claude Coates, of course, did a lot of artwork that was besides Disney park stuff, right? So he also worked with the movies. So he has this fantastic piece of art from concept art for Chernobog, the night on Bald Mountain. And you can see the shadow effect that's so much like the witch. I don't know if you can pull that witch one back up, Kirk, if you have it.
Yep.
But see, this is Claude Coates who designed this attraction. This was his concept art, and then this is the shadow effect too. So I mean, it's like, again, it reinforces that idea that this was his art style, that he liked this kind of shadowy, distorted, stylistic. I don't know what looking design style. So
yeah, it looks like the shadow on the right of Chernobog is going. Or at least that's when
exactly
I would do it.
right.
I was that large, and I was obscuring a town with my great shadow.
Yeah, but do you see the scary trees also, I think, are in this a little bit as well. I think we'll see that as we venture into the frightening forest. Yeah. So we had the shelf that is crashing down above your heads, and you're hearing the sound of that. Do we want to head outside of the castle into the moat?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let me. I'll pull up our map too to give us more context of where we're heading next. So we've just left. The witch is Cauldron, and we're heading towards the witch in a boat.
Witch in a boat. She sounds so pleasant, but she's like not. She's not pleasant. She's terrifying. She's there.
She's a witch in a boat.
She's got her apple. But again, this is where we see that come into Disneyland in 1983. Their version comes from this, where she's popping out of a tunnel, floating on a boat, and she's there wanting you to have an apple. And she's just everywhere at this point. We also see a little bit further on here, we see some snapping logs, just like the ones we saw in Disneyland, but there's some this is a fantastic photo of it, I think. Oh, yeah. But you also see the tree. Doesn't that tree look so much like that hand we just looked at? Mm-hmm. Like, that's like, this is just Claude Coates style. And I do have concept art.
These snapping trees are so cool because they do physically move and open and close. So they like lunge at you. Mm-hmm. So there is a horizontal movement towards our car.
Right. Well, and this is a concept art from Gustav Tengren of the snapping logs and Snow White. So you can see where that originally came from the 1937 film.
I remember this scene specifically when I was a kid because this whole entire forest scene is very scary and very dark, and it sticks into your mind the horror that was this attraction.
Yeah, I'm surprised that was the thing that scared you the most, because
no, it wasn't her, right? And it wasn't the gators. It was the trees, to be honest.
Yeah, the trees will do it.
We haven't gotten there yet.
Well, I think we're coming up on there next.
Real close, yep.
So after the logs,
I mean, look at that.
Let's do the trees.
Can you see why I might have been scared of that?
There's so much more graphic than the Disneyland version. I feel like they toned it down for the Disneyland version. These ones have mouths and teeth and red eyes. Like,
It's a
so
straight
creepy.
it's a straight goblin trapped in a tree. That is a
Yeah.
goblin face. Oh my god, dude. Seriously. This is my nightmare.
Yeah, this is why I think this is the scariest version, because they pull no punches. They're like, we're going to make these trees as scary as possible. We're not alluding to them reaching for you. We're making them into actual monsters that are going to grab you.
Yeah. And again, our audio is that like super, super creepy, like and then like raven noises. It's awful.
Yeah, yeah. And this is where we get...
dark.
It is dark.
in here.
Well, and this is where we get your eyes now. We have the eyes that we bypassed before, but we should come back to that.
Dude, can we talk about how close these things are? Just like watch this ride through real quick. Look how close the tree mouth is right now.
They're going to get you.
That there's no doubt in my mind that a guest can easily touch any of these. They're within like a foot and a half.
Well, and yeah, it's yes. I would say I have a little interesting tree story, but it doesn't have to do with scary trees. I don't know if you would like to hear it, but it is a Snow White story.
Would I ever? A Snow White story about trees that aren't scary? Okay, hang on.
Okay.
Good. I'm ready.
So this is something that I read from Grim Natwick. This is something that I read from an interview with Grim Natwick, who was one of the original animators for Snow White. He did he animated Snow White, and he also is Betty Boop animator, Betty Boop. But anyway, I read this original interview, and it was very, very technical and very dry, and I combed through it so you guys don't have to. But we all know that the prince's animation was extremely rough in this movie. That's why he got 2 minutes worth of screen time. They had a really hard time animating him and making him look like believable and also like a man. Like they just couldn't get him together to make him look right. So Milt Kahl stepped in and did a lot of that animation, even though he was still kind of an assistant animator at that point. But he was very talented in making humans. So he animating humans well. So Grim Natwick said this about him, that Milt's early animation was fastidiously and perfectly done, but he traced it too close to the photographic tracings. What I did on one scene, I remember when the prince was walking over to sing under the window, I suggested throwing a couple of trees in the foreground so that you wouldn't be conscious of the walk. So I started looking at Snow White and watching scenes with the prince, and I started realizing that they use that a lot. They put trees in the multiplane camera over him when he was walking a lot of the time, probably to hide some imperfections in his animation. And I was like, mind blown. So next time you watch Snow White, keep an eye on how often they put branches and trees in front of the prince, because that's how they're going to hide some of the mistakes that they made.
I think I'm going to, in the future, always carry a limb with me with leaves, so that way I can always hide my imperfections when I'm feeling self-conscious. I just will throw a tree in front of myself and everything's fine. You don't know?
Yeah. I just carry around a big tree, a log.
Yeah. I think it's
anyway. So anyway, that wasn't a scary tree story, but it was a tree story that I found recently. So I
like
share
the
it.
tree story.
Yeah. But let's talk about the iMobile, because you've heard of Batmobile, but this is the iMobile. The Batmobile is over in the Haunted Mansion, or at least it used to be. The iMobile is here in the Frightening Forest. This was a Yale Gracie and Rolly Crump invention. They were first to install the floating eyes in the Frightening Forest in the Disneyland version in the mid-1960s, which is not something I had found until now. So they put a version of this in Disneyland's version first, and then it ended up coming here. But it was inspired by, of course, one of Rolly Crump's mobile contraptions, because that's what he did, right? He made spinning things, kinetic sculptures and whatnot. So do you want to describe what it is?
Yeah, I mean, so the way that this structure would work is it had a long pole and then a fixed in the center point was a fulcrum that could rotate around itself, and you would have two, like, they almost look like bird or bat masks, you know, like their faces on it, but they would spin, right? So like this would spin forward end over end, and it would look like something was swooping down on you or coming at you, the way that they would spin.
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of like the eyes that they put in the Haunted Mansion later, that they kind of have like, they're just on like tubes, you know, that are like little boxes that they illuminate. Of course, that came much, much later than these, but I feel like that's the newer iteration of what this was, except they don't move like this does.
Well, you know what though? The other day I was stuck at that exact same spot in the Haunted Mansion. You know what's so cool about those boxes? When they blink from the bottom and the top, which is how people actually blink. I know that seems dumb, but it was a little subtlety that they could have easily just had one animation cell go over the top and been done with it, but they had to put in sequence too. I just thought that was cool.
Oh, like this?
Yeah.
Like
so right. So like you could imagine if it was just like blinking, like, because like when we blink, it's like in the center, it gets cut off, right? So like if an eye,
right.
Oh, I wish I had that. My kids had this like ping pong eyeball, but no. Anyway, the so like you could see it just like it would blink like that, but no, it's like it comes up from both sides, and it's just very realistic. And I'm like, I know what this thing looks like. It's literally a metal box with a stencil cut out that's illuminated, but then they use a shutter system to open and close in front of it. But I just thought that was cool that it's both sides. I was like, I never noticed that before when it blinks. I just would have thought it was like that, but it's not.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever noticed that either. That's really interesting.
I was stuck there, and I just was staring at the eyes for too long, and that's what I noticed.
Excellent. Maybe we should pause there and save the Dwarf's Cottage, the mine, and then the updates from 1994 for our next episode, just because we don't want to rush through any of that.
Yeah, I'm down. Okay. And besides, nobody needs to listen to 4 hours of us in a row. But if you want to listen to another episode, you can just press play to the next one.
We're there all the time, 24/7, 365 days a year.
Good God, could you imagine actually living with that? I mean, I know I live with myself all the time, and that's a burden. So at least you can pause and fast forward us.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm editing my audiobook right now. And so it's just like hours and hours of hearing myself talk. And I'm like, I don't want to hear myself talk ever again. Ever.
It always reminds me of that part in The Simpsons where he's like, you don't know what you sound like to Homer. Bart says it, that he records Homer, and Homer goes like, hey, this is Homer Simpson talking to all you ladies out there in Radio Land, right? And then it's like, hey, this is Homer Simpson. He goes, oh my God, I sound like that.
I love that part.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. Okay, well, shall we wrap it up?
Let's dip that apple. I don't know what.
Come up with something in the season.
I don't know. Dude, it's poison the apple. I don't know.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of Distory. We hope you enjoyed going into what I think is the most frightening version of this attraction ever made at Disney. Kirk, do you have any final thoughts here as we wrap up?
On that note, I would agree that Kirk was right, that this is scarier. That I was just reading that from Kate.
Well, you better save that because it's precious and it may never happen again.
That's not you said it multiple times.
I said again. I didn't say it's never happened before. Oh, okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being with us. This was such a fun episode, and we will continue next week with the rest of the attraction and the updates in 1994. But until then, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time for Distory.